Hello and welcome back to Travel in Chinese. I'm Mark Rosewell, also known as Dashan. In this series, we're learning vocabulary and sentence patterns that can be used in a wide variety of situations. But we're also looking specifically at situations that might arise for tourists in China. What would you say? What should you know? What kind of background information should you be aware of? For example, in a previous lesson, Huan Renhao had misplaced his wallet. Luckily, they were able to find a security guard who returned the wallet to him. But what if he'd come across a pickpocket instead? That might have been a different story. Let's take a look at today's dialogue.
我们得快点了，要不该赶不上这场电影了。
我好久没有到电影院看电影了，还远吗？
不远了。哎，雪梅，你的包怎么开着呢？
怪了，我明明拉上了，怎么开了呢？啊，我的钱包没有了。
那其他东西呢？
我看看，护照、笔记本都在，只有钱包丢了。
在什么地方丢的呢？
不是公共汽车上，就是地铁里。我怎么一点感觉都没有呢？
别急，我们再找找。如果不行的话，我们再去派出所报案。
哎，雪梅，
哎，小李你好，
我打老远就看见你了，跟你打了半天招呼，你也没看见我。哎，这位是？
这是我先生的表姐，这是我同事小李。
哎，您好。
您好。
您二位是去哪儿啊？
别提了。本来我想和表姐一起去看电影的，可是发现我的钱包不见了，这不正到处找呢。
一出地铁口，我就发现她的包开了。
哦，那是在地铁里丢的吧？
这个说不好，也许在公共汽车上就已经丢了。
要我说，你们最好还是去派出所报个案吧。
对，我们还是先去派出所吧。如果被人捡到了，他们也好通知我们。
派出所离这儿远吗？
哦，不远，从这儿往前走就到了。不然我陪你们两个一块儿去吧。
哦，谢谢。都怪我不小心，现在电影也看不成了。
瞧你说的，丢东西这事儿谁都难免，电影看不成有什么大不了的？咱们走吧。
好，走。
Okay, now let's go over the dialogue part by part. Xue Mei and her cousin-in-law are taking the subway when Xue Mei realizes that her purse is open. 怪了，我明明拉上了。That's strange. I'm sure I closed it. 怪了 is like 奇怪, strange. 明明 means that something is obvious or you're sure of something. 拉 is to pull, or in this case, to zip up a zipper.
我们得快点了，要不该赶不上这场电影了。
我好久没有到电影院看电影了，还远吗？
不远了。哎，雪梅，你的包怎么开着呢？
怪了，我明明拉上了，怎么开了呢？
Her wallet is missing. 不是在公共汽车上，就是在地铁里。If it wasn't on the bus, it must have been on the subway. Of course, this sentence by itself could either be past or present tense. Based on the context of the dialogue, we translate it into English as being in the past tense. Today we're going to be looking at this pattern, 不是 this, 就是 that. If it's not this, it must be that.
啊，我的钱包没有了。
那其他东西呢？
我看看，护照、笔记本都在，只有钱包丢了。
在什么地方丢的呢？
不是公共汽车上，就是地铁里。我怎么一点感觉都没有呢？
别急，我们再找找。如果不行的话，我们再去派出所报案。
我怎么一点感觉都没有呢？ How could it be that I didn't feel anything? 一点 something 都没有 is another useful pattern. To not have the slightest amount of something. When asked if the wallet was lost in the subway, Xue Mei can only say, 这个说不好. That's hard to say. She can't be sure. All they can do now is file a report and hope for the best. Remember to leave a phone number. 有消息，我们好通知您. That will allow us to contact you when we have news. Here, 好 is used to indicate so that, in order that.
您二位是去哪儿啊？
别提了，本来我想和表姐一起去看电影的，可是发现我的钱包不见了，这不正到处找呢。
一出地铁口，我就发现她的包开了。
哦，那是在地铁里丢的吧？
这个说不好，也许在公共汽车上就已经丢了。
Should they go to the police station? 要我说，你们最好还是去。In my view, it would be best if you went. 要我说 is like saying, if you ask me. In this sentence, 还是 is used to indicate a suggestion or recommendation. We learned this in an earlier lesson.
要我说，你们最好还是去派出所报个案吧。
对，我们还是先去派出所吧。如果被人捡到了，他们也好通知我们。
派出所离这儿远吗？
哦，不远，从这儿往前走就到了。不然我陪你们两个一块儿去吧。
瞧你说的 is a colloquial expression to indicate that you disagree with what has been said. Literally, look at what you've said. Here it's used to respond to Xue Mei blaming herself for the trouble. Her cousin-in-law is trying to cheer her up. 丢东西这事儿，谁都难免. As for losing things, it could happen to anybody. It's hard to avoid. 难免 literally means difficult to avoid. Let's watch this part again.
谢谢，都怪我不小心，现在电影也看不成了。
瞧你说的，丢东西这事儿谁都难免，电影看不成有什么大不了的？咱们走吧。
走。
Let's take a bit of a break now and talk about some of the background that came up in today's dialogue. The Beijing subway dates back to the 1960s, but it's undergoing rapid development right now. Originally there were two subway lines, a circular line that follows under the second ring road. This was originally the location of the Beijing city wall. Many of the intersections today still retain the original place names. That's why many of the subway stops are places called men or gate, like Qianmen, the front gate, just south of Tiananmen. A second original subway line travels along an east-west route, following under Chang'an Boulevard. This is the wide avenue that passes right in front of Tiananmen Square. In fact, there are two subway exits on the east and west side of the square. Chang'an Boulevard changes names as it goes from the far eastern side of Beijing to right near the western hills on the other side of Beijing. In recent years, old lines have been expanded and new lines are being built. Some of these lines go up to the Summer Palace or around the northern suburbs of Beijing. Another line cuts straight through the city from north to south. These lines are often called qinggui, light rail transit, rather than 地铁, subway, because they travel at least part of their routes elevated above the city rather than underground. By the time the Olympics arrive in 2008, much of this new construction will have been finished. Now let's take a closer look at a few language points from today's dialogue. For example, 明明. This is used to show that something is clearly or obviously. It's often used to highlight a contrast. Something is obviously different. For example, 你明明知道下午有事，为什么还出去? You obviously knew that there was something happening this afternoon. Why did you go out? 你明明知道下午有事，为什么还出去? Here's another example. 他明明去过那儿，却说他根本没去过. He's obviously been there before, but he said he'd never been there before. He's obviously gone there before. 他明明去过那儿，却说他根本没去过.
哎，雪梅，你的包怎么开着呢？
怪了，我明明拉上了，怎么开了呢？啊，我的钱包没有了。
那其他东西呢？
我看看。
Now we're going to look at a character that you all know, but we're going to see it being used in a different way. 好, of course, means good, but here it's used as a conjunction, so that, in order that. For example, 带上雨衣吧，下雨好用. Bring a raincoat in case it rains, or so that when it rains you can use it. 带上雨衣吧，下雨好用. Here's another example. 你留个电话，有事好互相联系. Leave me your phone number so that we can contact each other when we need to. 你留个电话，有事好互相联系.
那是在地铁里丢的吧？
这个说不好，也许在公共汽车上就已经丢了。
要我说，你们最好还是去派出所报个案吧。
对，我们还是先去派出所吧。如果被人捡到了，他们也好通知我们。
派出所离这儿远吗？
Okay, here's another language point. 难免 meaning hard to avoid or almost inevitable. For example, 朋友之间看法难免有时会不一致。Even between friends, it's hard to avoid sometimes having different points of view. 朋友之间看法难免有时会不一致。Here's another example. 你刚开始学习汉语，这样的错误是难免的。You've just started learning Chinese. This kind of mistake is hard to avoid. 你刚开始学习汉语，这样的错误是难免的。Okay, let's go back to the dialogue now and see how these language points were used.
不然我陪你们两个一块儿去吧。
谢谢，都怪我不小心，现在电影也看不成了。
瞧你说的，丢东西这事儿谁都难免，电影看不成有什么大不了的？咱们走吧。走。
There's a sentence pattern from today's dialogue that would be really good for a substitution exercise. That's 不是 this, 就是 that. If it's not this, it must be that. Now this and that could be a phrase or could be a whole sentence. 不是 this, 就是 that. Let's try some substitutions.
在什么地方丢的呢？
不是公共汽车上，就是地铁里，我怎么一点感觉都没有呢？
别急，我们再找找。如果不行的话，我们再去派出所报案。
他的衣服不是蓝的，就是黑的。
他的衣服不是蓝的，就是黑的。
他不是在办公室，就是在家，你肯定能找到他。
他不是在办公室，就是在家，你肯定能找到他。
别提了，本来我想和表姐一起去看电影的，可是发现我的钱包不见了，这不正到处找呢。
一出地铁口，我就发现他的包开了。
哦，那是在地铁里丢的吧？
这个说不好，也许在公共汽车上就已经丢了。
要我说，你们最好还是去派出所报个案吧。
对，我们还是先去派出所吧。如果被人捡到了，他们也好通知我们。
派出所离这儿远吗？
哦，不远，从这儿往前走就到了。不然我陪你们两个一块儿去吧。
谢谢，都怪我不小心，现在电影也看不成了。
瞧你说的，丢东西这事儿谁都难免，电影看不成有什么大不了的？咱们走吧。走。
Unfortunately, in today's dialogue, Xue Mei was unable to retrieve her wallet. 她明明把包拉上了。She clearly had closed her bag. 怎么开了呢? How was it opened? Do you think maybe she'd come across a pickpocket? 这个说不好. It's hard to say. It's hard to be sure. 丢东西这事儿谁都难免. It's hard for anybody to avoid losing something once in a while. At least now you'll know some of the language that can be useful in that kind of situation. Well, if you have any comments or questions about our show, please contact us. And we look forward to seeing you next time. 再见。